to webinar 4, how to never lose a deal. Today I'm going to show you how to make sure you keep all of your listings and buys in check so they never fall out of escrow. I'm going to make sure you know how to negotiate with people when situations get a little intense. And of course, we're going to make sure you have the knowledge in place and the steps that allow you to break down what I do so 99% of my real estate transactions never fall out. Let's get to it. Okay, a lot of people get confused about what it means to deal doctor, and that's kind of what I do right now with the entire team. We've got 10 other agents that are always doing business. We'll do maybe 200 transactions this year. My number one job is I am the deal doctor. And what that means is when things go wrong in a transaction, buying or selling, it's my job to get involved and make sure that liability is covered and that the deal doesn't fall apart. And a lot of people get confused about how to manage this, but there's really 3 steps that I've identified that allow you to become extremely efficient at saving your transactions, because the more transactions you can save, the more you're going to do, the less time you're going to spend on finding other properties, which at the end of the year is going to return you got it, higher return, and more transaction closed, more volume, more GCI, and it's going to make your clients really happy. So let's go over this. There's 3 steps. 1, we're going to call it preparation. 2, knowledge. 3, negotiation. We'll abbreviate them. Very first thing, and this is the most important one, the preparation. So in order to prepare for the situation, I've kind of broken it down into these steps. The very first thing you do is you assess the entire situation. And what does that mean? That means you recognize, okay, understand all of the points. There's the buyers here. I'm representing the seller. You have the attorney, you have the lender, you have title and escrow, you have the buyer side agents, you have our side, and then you have the broker for each one of them. And maybe you even have some family situations involved. So the very first thing we always do is, my recommendation, if you're in a situation where you're trying to doctor this deal, you're going to take 20, 30 minutes and you're going to shut up. You're not going to talk to anybody about anything. You're not going to say anything stupid. You're just going to sit down and you are going to assess, okay, what exactly is going on? Then, when you think you've identified all the parties, you know what the buyers want, you know what the sellers want, and let's create an example, a real-world example that was a pretty easy one. I represented the seller, and the other agent represented the buyer. And the buyer wanted the seller to pay for the home, for all the shrubbery in the backyard to be removed. There's all these shrubs and bamboo, and it was dirty, it was gross, it was a whole thing. And so the first thing I did was, I was like, okay, so buyer wants us to pay for this, seller wants us to pay for that, and before you as an agent get all involved in any of this, when the buyer asks for this or submits this request, you're just going to calmly say, thank you, let me get back to you, I'll let you know. We don't give them any indication if we're going to do it. If we're not, we're just going to tell them we're going to get back to them. So the first thing we need to do is understand what every side wants. But here's the thing. This is where step 1 is where everybody messes up. Because you, as an agent, are responsible for clarifying what everybody's wants and needs are. So before you go to the seller and say this is what they want, we need to think through this. Okay, Mr. Buyer, so you want the shrubs removed. First of all, which shrubs? Like specifically, there's vegetation around the entire property. What is it exactly you want moved? Okay, and you want this moved prior to closing, is that right? Yes, I do. Okay, got it. And question, how come this wasn't addressed prior to accepting the offer? At the time, it was still there when we accepted the offer, so it's not like it was new information we just dumped on. And so we're gonna explore. We're gonna ask clarifying questions. Hey, how come this came up right now? Like, we're 40 days in, we're closing in 5 days. The shrubs have been there the entire listing period, before the listing period, and while we've been in escrow. Why is it that you're trying to do this like right now? And so help me, Mr. Agent, Mr. Buyer's agent, please help me understand where the buyer is coming from. Step one. So now what have we done? We've kind of assessed the situation. We've started to clarify. And now, okay, we want these shrubs moved by these dates. Well, the reason they didn't want them moved is because they didn't realize how much it was going to cost. They thought they could do it on themselves, but really we're realizing it's going to cost about $1,500. Okay, so there's something new in the play, which is we know it's going to cost $1,500 to have this removed according to their landscaper, contractor, handyman, whoever. Cool, Mr. Buyer's agent. Hey, can I see that? Who gave you that number? Oh, a family friend. Cool. Did they put it in writing? No. Would you mind having them send it over to me so then I can present it to the seller? So now we have all the information. Now what we need to do is we need to go back to our client, but we need to do it tactfully. And I have a strategy where I call it highs and lows. So my strategy is when I go to a client, I am going to tell them what the seller, what's being requested of them, how much they're expected to pay, but I'm always going to tell them the worst case scenario. So here's what they want. What we could do is we could accept it. Also, worst case scenario is we don't accept it, they cancel, we go back on the market. And I walk them through the entire timeline, not to scare them, because you don't want a client that's scared, but to educate them so they know so they understand all the steps. Then, what I'm going to do before anything really even happens is I'm going to go to the buyer side, and I'm going to tell them what the worst case scenario is for there. So this is the lows. And so what I've done is I've kind of set the expectation for the seller at, this is worst case scenario. This could happen. And then I take for the buyers, worst case scenario, this could happen. Now, obviously, nobody's excited about the worst case scenarios. But then what ends up happening is halfway through, you deliver the message. This is what could happen. This is what could happen. You let both parties sit on it. Patience and negotiation go hand in hand. The person that is the least patient typically is the one that loses the negotiation. Remember that. And then, as they've had a day or two to sit on everything, this is where you as an agent have a brilliant idea. Well, hold on, guys. Actually, I have an idea, Mr. Seller, Mr. Buyer. I know that this is a scale of how happy you are and how sad you are because the transaction falls out. I set your expectation down here. You're not going to make any money. It's not going to close in 5 days. That sucks. Buyers, I set your expectation down here. You're not very happy. It's not going to close. That's going to suck. What I suggest is we're just going to come up here. Now, you're not going to get away from not paying for the whole thing, but Mr. Seller, you're going to keep half of what you could, and maybe you have to pay $750 to have it repaired. Maybe buyer, you have to pay $750. And so what I've done is I made it seem like the worst outcome is going to happen. And then when there's a slightly better outcome, oh, that's not so bad. And you can do this with everything. And obviously don't do this with little tiny details. You don't make a big deal about everything. But when you're setting people's expectations, now the seller's excited. Oh, great job, Devin. Thank you. I'm really glad we were able to negotiate for that. The buyer side feel like they're getting something out of it because 9 out of 10 times, it's less about the problem, the shrubbery, the termite, whatever. 9 out of 10 times, it's about them feeling like the other side is going to compromise. I mean, that's it. Rarely will clients ever say, this has to be done or I'm going to cancel. I mean, rarely. If they know that the other party is willing to compromise and work with them and do what they're able to do, it almost always solves the issues. And so what this does is it just gets a little bit of flexibility from both sides. So what have we done? We've kind of talked through the prep work, thought about how the negotiation might take place, but in this scenario, it's pretty easy. So we talked about prep. Here's the next thing you need to do though. You need to have knowledge. And when I say knowledge, I mean you need to understand the industry, the ins and outs, what's going on. Because if you know about rental laws, if you know about lender regulations, regs, if you know about the purchase contract in detail, you are in a position where you understand what is allowed and what is not. And let me come up with a good example here that just happened the other day. This is a super easy one. Sometimes you get negotiations that are a little bit tougher, and sometimes you get ones where it's like, oh. And then you get these where you're like, heck yeah, I love these because I can just solve it right away. An agent on our team, Chris Vinatieri, who is killing it in his first year. Shout out to you, Chris. He's probably on his 12th or 15th deal so far. And he has a client where he represents the buyer and the other agent represents the seller. The buyer found that there were termites in the property through the termite inspection. And now the termite company recommended fumigation. That's where they go, they tent the house, they put this clown covering thing on it, and they just put a bunch of gas in it and it kills all the bugs. It's great. If you ever do it with a house that has a bunch of rats, after you go in the house, after it's done, there's gonna be rats everywhere. Don't recommend. Anyway, the seller's agent stated, because fumigation's like $5,000, $6,000 sometimes, I'm not paying for that. That's way too much. We just want to do spot treatment. So Chris calls me. He's like, dude, the seller refused to sell if he has to fumigate. I was like, cool, keep going. And they only want to do spot treatment, that's the only way they're going to sell. Can he do that? Can he refuse to sign? Good question. And I said, well, what does the purchase contract say? And he's like, well, I don't know. Well, he kind of knew, but I walked him through it. And the purchase contract states that if termites are found, any infestation at all, the seller is obligated to pay for the recommended treatment from the company, from the termite inspection company. So now we go back to the seller's agent and tell them, per section L2, L3, whichever it was, the seller is obligated to pay for this and whatever the recommended treatment is, not just a spot treatment, because that's like $500 and doesn't always cover it, and it has to be done 5 days prior to closing. This was an easy situation because we had the knowledge to know that what has to happen, what they're obligated to do. But imagine, and this is an easier one, but let's say it was something more complicated, a little bit more deeper, like a lending requirement and you have to deliver final loan approval by a certain deadline. If you didn't understand the purchase contract, if you don't know it inside and out and you can read that shit backwards, if you don't know it, you're gonna have a really hard time negotiating on any of your contracts. So when you're doctoring deals, trying to save the day, you need to know this stuff. Now, I want you to just imagine, let's say we didn't know that, what would have happened? Well, we would have gone back and forth. Maybe it turns out we have to fumigate to get their loan. If we didn't hold them to it, they're not doing a fumigation. They could have canceled, say $5 or $6 grand, done a spot treatment on their own if they had to, and then we would have canceled the transaction and have to go find another deal for our buyer. But what happens if our buyer is frustrated and doesn't want to buy another house? And he just ends up canceling and losing it. This is why it's so important that you understand so many things that it's going to come up where you just have to read the contract. You have to understand what's going on. And don't be afraid to ask questions because I listen to this guy, Tom Bilyeu, who always says, I am a learner. I'm happy to be the dumbest person in the room, but I'm always going to be asking questions, and that's what you need to be doing. You need to be asking this between buyers, sellers, termite companies, purchase contracts, your broker, attorneys. Always ask questions on these things. We covered preparation, we covered knowledge, we went through examples of each one and why it's important. We're going to cover the last one. Negotiation. I might have spelled that wrong. If you are not comfortable being in that discomfort, in a little bit of conflict, asking hard questions, you are going to have a difficult time in this business. So number one, you have to ask the hard questions. What are hard questions? For some agents, it might be as easy as, why are you moving? Where are you going? Do you want to do this? Another hard question would be, Mr. Seller, do you think your home is overpriced? Do you think it's going to sell at this price? If you're not willing to have these conversations with people, you're going to end up in a situation where nothing moves forward. The reason they're hard is because they're true, and don't be afraid to lose a client by pointing out the obvious, something that needs to be addressed. If I list a home and we don't have an offer within 2 to 4 weeks right away, I know that I need to have a conversation about list price, because our list price is probably too high, assuming you're doing good marketing for it. Number two, there's always a little bit of conflict when you're negotiating with an agent or with a client, whether it's listing price, commission, or working for your client and talking to another agent. The best example I can really give of this is when your client is at the negotiating table with you and you're going over commission, and they say, Devin, will you do it for 5%? A lot of agents get really nervous by that question. Let's say you charge 6%, but they want to do it for 5%. All it is a question, because sometimes the answer to that is, I totally understand, unfortunately we cannot. In 7 out of 10 times, that answer will work and they'll do it for 6%. Sometimes you'll say no, and then they'll push back. They'll say, well, Devin, we only want to work with an agent that's going to do it for a cheaper commission. Then you have to use objection handlers and negotiate a little bit. Mr. Seller, I totally understand, and at the end of the day, I imagine you want to net the most amount of money from this sale. Is that right? Yes, it is. Okay, I'm glad we're on the same page. The reason we charge 6% is because we do, and you should have done this already, we do XYZ marketing. This is part of our marketing package. We pay for this. We pay for the staging. We pay for the photos. A lot of agents are going to do all of this separately. We cover it. Now, here's my fear. We list it at 5%. We give you the commission rate, but we're not paying for any of these things. And we don't have good offers. We don't have the property looking tip-top, show-ready shape. And we get lower offers than we should have, because let's say we list the home for $800,000 and we get 10% above asking, which is not unheard of. So you get $880K, and now so that's what happens at 6%, but now you want to save money. We list that home at $800, we get an offer at $800. We just saved 1%, $8,000, but lost $80,000. Does that make sense? And obviously you're not going to be shouting at them like I'm shouting at you right now, but if you're able to explain this, logically walk them through the steps, show them the pros and cons of doing it, you're going to be in a position where, yes, there's conflict, but as long as you're comfortable there, like you can hang out there, you're going to do good. And there's a saying which is, the last person to speak always loses. And I will tell you, I was at a negotiating table with a seller who wanted to charge less commission. This was like 5 years ago. And I said, this is how much we charge. And I watched him, and he watched me. And then 5 seconds go by. 10 seconds go by. I can see the wife in the kitchen, who's like kind of right there, in and out. Her eyes go big. And he's sitting there, and we sit there for a solid 90 seconds in silence, which at that time felt like an eternity. And he goes, you know what? You're holding to it. I like it. I want to work with you. Let's do it. And we shook hands and we sold his house. That is what allows you to get through all of these deal doctors. So we're going to take all of these things we just covered and we're going to put it into a simple 4 or 5 steps that you can follow next time you're in a situation. Step number 1. You're going to shut up. Not going to say anything. They're going to tell you what they want. You're going to assess the situation. Step number 2, assess. Figure out what's going on. Step number 3, do you know it? We covered it. You're going to clarify. Make sure you understand what it is people want, because I have had so many people reach out to me and say, Devin, I want this, this, and this. And when I ask them, well, what exactly do you mean? Because that's kind of already included, like blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, never mind, we're good. Just send me the paperwork. Half of the time you clarify stuff, they're just going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, never mind. Not worried about it. Because it's just, some people don't know the ins and outs so well like you do, whether it is a client or even sometimes an agent. And when you clarify something, they're just going to be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I didn't realize, totally understand what I was asking for. And sometimes people get hung up on these like little details that are so irrelevant. And that's why I use this phrase, let's not win the battle and lose the war. And what I mean by that is, let's not win this negotiation for $200 or $300, but end up with a house that's left in disarray or disaster when they sell because they're mad at us. Let's not win the battle and lose the war. It's one of my favorite lines. And especially another line you can use when your clients are getting really hung up on small details is, okay, let's say the furnishings aren't going to be included and they really wanted the furnishings of the property. I totally get it. It's frustrating, but at the same time, are we buying the house or are we buying this furniture? The furniture is worth $12,000 at the very most. The house is worth 1.4. What are we really buying here? Break it down so they understand. Then number 4. So let's just reassess here. When you're doctoring a deal, 1, you shut up. Assess all the players, figure out what's going on. Clarify the situation and what exactly it is you want, because half the time you get through here and then they just go away. And if you need to, this is my favorite one, match. What does this mean? This means when your client is in a situation, or anybody, and they're obviously frustrated, you are frustrated too. In fact, sometimes I will get on the phone with a client and I'll immediately realize they're mad about a situation. Guess who's also mad? Devin. Devin's more mad than you are. So what I will do is I will reaffirm what you're saying. They didn't do the cleaning, they didn't do this, and you're right. And you know, they've been dragging us along for all these things, and we've been nothing but so compliant. You're right, Devin. This is what. And so now you're going from, sometimes it's them versus you, to, whoa, 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 whoa. It's you and me versus the situation. So it's not your fault, Devin, agent, but all we're doing is you're just going from here to here, and we're attacking the problem head on. Because when they feel understood and that you're listening to their needs, they're with you. They're with you on this. And that's why it's so important you have to have a cool head in this industry. You've got to be calm. And you also have to know when to fold. Sometimes you're just like, wow, my client is totally in the wrong here. The buyer is 100% in the right. I wish there was more I could do about this situation, but there's really not. And so sometimes you just need to know when to walk away. I don't think this deal is worth saving. Cut it. If you go through all these steps and you follow that process of meeting people in the middle, like we talked about, you are going to be able to do a couple things. You're going to be able to make your clients feel heard. They're going to be excited to work with you. You're going to be saving all of your transactions. Your business partners and other agents and even brokers in the office are going to be asking for you for advice on what to do to handle these things. And most importantly, you're going to save a crap ton of time, because nobody likes it when a deal falls apart and you just wasted 6 months chasing a transaction. Because I will tell you, I had an escrow once for 2 years. It was a short sale, 24 plus months I was carrying this. We opened escrow on June 2014 and we fell out of escrow June 2016. It didn't even close. It didn't even close. All that time sucks. So in that situation, I should have known when to fold and walk away. It doesn't matter how good I was at any of this. If you like this content, please send me information. Let me know what kind of more content you want to see. And of course, I'm offering 10-minute coachings to any agent that is in Hawaii market that's like, I'm having troubles with this, but I don't know how to solve it. That's what I'm here for. I'm literally, I think, one of the best at this. Please reach out. Aloha.